Rainy days often make me want to curl up in something warm and cozy. Or in this case, make something cozy. You remember that folklore cardigan trend that hit the knitting community a few years back? Needless to say, I jumped on that bandwagon, not because I necessarily like Taylor Swift, I really don't, but because I love cable knitwear, and I really do love this cardigan. This was my first all-over cabled project, and I made it for my sister, and because I absolutely love the way this turned out, I may or may not be jealous that she's the owner of it and not me. So I decided to finally stop being envious and just knit my own with a few minor adjustments. First, I want to change the rib button band to a double knit button band with no buttons, not only since I don't really like buttoning oversized cardigans personally, but since I also want this to have a more classic and, dare I say, machine knit look. I will also use a tubular cast on or bind off for the ribbing to, again, achieve a more polished look, and I'll make the color a solid blue since, well, it's my favorite color. Finally, I'll be adding Afterthought pockets to my version. First, I wrote down the instructions for the different cable charts because I personally prefer looking at paper rather than a screen. I made this very long gauge swatch to test how the cables would look since I went up a needle size than what the pattern recommends because I tend to knit cables tightly and I wanted my cardigan to be oversized. And by the way, the pattern I'm using is a free pattern from Landh brand, which I'll link in the description. I love the drape this fabric gave me, so just went ahead and knit the smallest size in the pattern since I had a bigger needle without measuring my gauge. So as you'll see upcoming, that ended up being a very bad decision. My first alteration to the pattern was to use a smaller knitting needle for the ribbing because I like a tighter ribbed look, and I chose a 4.5mm needle. I also decided to cast on with a tubular cast on with the provisional cast on method, which is why I have this green yarn at the bottom. When I remove the green yarn, I get this polished edge. When the ribbing in the first few cable repeats were finished, I started feeling like it wasn't wide enough for the oversized look I wanted, so I measured it against the cardigan I already owned that has the fit I'm looking for. Stretching it obviously showed it would work, and even though I told myself I was stretching it too much, I ignored my instincts with the presumption that it would stretch in wet blocking. Also, I'm really sorry for the color shift of this yarn. It was very hard to get the true color on camera. Because I still had my doubts, I steam blocked my piece, which is a technique I learned from Laura Penrose of Penrose Knits. In lieu of wet blocking, which usually involves a finished garment, you can steam your piece while you're still knitting it to relax the stitches and see if it's going to be the right size before you actually finish it. Mine was still coming out smaller than I wanted, but I made the mistake of stretching it to the right measurement, thinking that's what would happen in wet blocking. And of course, I was wrong. When I was almost ready to bind off for the back panel, I decided to steam block it once more since I was again not feeling great about the size, and because I actually had enough fabric to see how it was going to work and I didn't stretch it too much this time, I realized what I had known all along. It was too small. I know that I could easily edit out my mistakes for you guys and show myself seamlessly constructing the cardigan, but mistakes are in the knitting process, at least in mine, and I want to encourage you not to be discouraged by your knitting mistakes, but rather learn from them. For me, while it was very disappointing to have to rip back so much work, I learned that I shouldn't stretch my garments when steam blocking, and instead I need to measure my garment that the steaming produces at that time. I can tell you that I won't be making that mistake again. So yes, I spent time on this garment, but I don't think I would classify it as wasted time. For the sake of time, I'm jumping ahead to where I completed the back in the second size, which I steam blocked correctly to double check that it was indeed the right size. I then moved on to the left front, and like I did with the back, I'm starting with the tubular provisional cast on. At this point, I was ready to make the marker for my Afterthought pocket. If you've never done this method of making pockets before, it's so simple and straightforward, and I love it because you literally add the pocket after you've completed the garment, an Afterthought. However, you do need to mark where you're going to have the pocket with scrap yarn, so while your pocket is kind of an afterthought, you will need to know ahead of time where you want it on your cardigan or sweater or what have you. What I've done, as I'm indicating here, is use stitch markers to show me where I want my pocket to be in the pattern and just how wide. I settled for 22 stitches. So I knit in pattern all the way up to my first marker, and then I stop knitting in pattern and grab my scrap yarn, which is a different color from my garment, which is very important for being able to see this later. Then I only knit those 22 stitches rather than working in pattern. Once I get to my second marker, which is where I want my pocket to end, I turn my work and I purl back to the starting marker. Once you're back at your starting marker, cut the scrap yarn, pick up your original yarn and knit across those stitches in your original yarn, returning to the pattern of the sweater, making sure you slip the markers of your pocket as you go. You'll then continue knitting in your original pattern, and when you get to those knit stitches you worked over the scrap yarn, slip the markers and make the stitches back into your original pattern, whether that's with knits or purls. For a reference as to where my pattern would have been had I not added the scrap yarn, I looked at the stitch pattern below my scrap yarn. And if this part of the video isn't making that much sense, there are many tutorials here on YouTube for this that give more of a step-by-step explanation if you just search Afterthought Pocket. Once you reach a certain length, about the armpit, I believe, the pattern asks you to start decreasing to give the front of the cardigan that V-neck shape. So that's what you can see me doing here, is counting the stitches and placing a stitch marker for where I'll need to start making the decreases. Then, to avoid sewing, I used a 3-needle bind off to join the back and the front. Alright, to make the pocket portion of this Afterthought pocket, you will use either a double pointed needle or a pair of circular needles and pick up the stitches right below your scrap yarn, so the last row before you switch to your contrast color. As you do this, it is very important to be picking up the right leg of the stitches, as you see me doing here. When you finish that, you will either use another double pointed needle or the other side of your circular needle, and you will pick up stitches from the first row of knitting you did in your normal color. So right after your last row of contrast color, pick up stitches on your very first row of your regular color. And again, make sure you're picking up stitches from the right leg. So when you finish this, the only stitches on your needle should be those of your primary color, those of the original garment, and you can now unpick the waste yarn in between. Sometimes you'll have to cut it, and that's totally okay because it's just scrap yarn. You basically just need to get this yarn out so there's a hole for your pocket. With the waste yarn gone, you are now free to just knit across. So literally all we're going to do is pick up our yarn, attach to our ball, and knit across. When you complete the first set of stitches on your needle, there will be this gap from where we picked up stitches on the first needle to where you picked up stitches on the second needle. And what you will just need to do is pick up 1 to 2 stitches to make sure that gap is closed when you knit your pocket. I personally pick up 2 stitches, but again, it depends on just how big your gap is and how tight of a knitter you are. Once you've picked up the stitches, you are free to knit across the second needle, and you will just continually knit all the way around until your pocket reaches your desired length. Alright, we are now down to the final touch, the double knit button band. This is only my third time knitting a double knit button band, and I always forget how to get it started. So I'm looking at Kurubo Kika's tutorial, which I actually watch every time I need to do this because she does such a good job showing the technique. And her channel in general is just amazing, just so you know. I am so pleased with how this cardigan turned out, and I've already worn it quite a few times and have had a few people ask me to make them their own. The cables are so simple to do, yet always look so complicated and more intricate than they are, so I highly recommend making yourself one of these cardigans if you haven't already. I will be linking my blog post down in the description below where I have all the notes on the changes I made to this cardigan, and if you knit one of these yourself, please tag me on Instagram so I can see your modifications, whether they're the ones I created or some I didn't even think of. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Your time is valuable, so I really appreciate that you decided to spend it with me. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the like button so both I and YouTube will know you want to see more videos like this, and consider subscribing because next time I'm going to be diving into sweater making from a Victorian pattern book, and I think you'll find that interesting. Until next time, many blessings and happy knitting.
Yeah? Yeah? No, go ahead. Slowly up.
Using Isaac.
Don't fall. Be silent. Stay.
First thing I did was translate the instructions. I didn't translate. Ugh.
Good enough.
My first alteration to the pattern was to use a smaller knitting needle for the ribbing because I personally like a tighter rib look, and I chose... What even is that?
Hey, 2 cardinals.